This is DJ.
This is Ish.
And this is
Pero Let Me Tell You.
Dale.
Well, now I'm thinking about La Chancleta. But did you ever watch her show in English?
I didn't know they had it in English.
Yeah, she tried to do a crossover, and her show in English, her catchphrase was "drop a chicken."
Drop a chicken?
Yes.
Like un gallo.
Or una gallina.
Or una gallina.
Yeah.
Why would anybody think that was a good idea?
This is a blonde Brazilian woman who would come out of a spaceship at the beginning of her show. So I think good
And
ideas,
dress like a little drummer boy. We're not sure why.
right.
But
So good ideas were not plentiful.
yeah, but they sure were successful.
Damn right they were.
I guess in that note,
On that note, we're in
welcome everyone. Bienvenidos.
Bienvenidos.
Episodio, what is it? 41.
41. So now
40, 41, 41, 40.
yeah. So now it's older than you.
Oui, c'est la vérité. Oh no.
What?
Why am I speaking French?
I don't know, because that's not even our shtick.
Pero let me deet you. Oh my god, can you imagine if we have a trilingual, like...
No, that's too many things. No. Yo no puedo con el español, el inglés, el francés, el italiano.
When I was more fluent in French...
Oh, you used to be very fluent in French.
When I was more fluent
Yeah.
in French, I would think in French. And I would, the
You
disparate
would
que
think in
decía.
French.
When I was really fluent in French, I no longer had to translate. Like, I would think in French.
Oh, wow.
Well, I told you, the first time I went to France, I was like, blah, 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 avec le français. And now I'll be that American tourist, like, bonjour.
Well, okay, but if we go to France, you'll still be better than me.
Oui.
Okay, so that's all that matters.
And I know how to say the important things, like, bonjour, je voudrais un glacé avec mes poissons, s'il vous plaît.
Dove les toilettes?
Which is, I would like ice with my drink.
Oh,
Because as you know, I'm that obnoxious American that fills his ice.
No. ¿Quién carajo se le gusta to drink room temperature?
Well, you know that's a very European thing.
No.
But, you know, that's why when I've gone...
We're Caribbean.
I've gone to France a few times. I'm like, bonjour, je voudrais mon boisson avec le glacé, s'il vous plaît. Merci. Bonjour. Anyway, let's take French out of this equation, since that's not pero, let me tell you.
What would that translate into?
Pero, pardon, le dit... vous?
Sure.
Pardon, dites-vous? Pardon, dites-vous?
Oui.
Oui.
Okay.
So, I feel that most Americans, what they know is, voulez-vous coucher avec moi ce soir?
Maya.
Hey, what was it? Pink?
And Pink was kind of boring. She was just like,
No, okay, let's do it for our listeners.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
So do you do it and I do the...
I'm gonna. Do you really think I'm gonna make the sounds?
Okay, no, this is true. We all heard your Cardi B. Yeah.
Maya. Pink. Little Kim. Christina. Rottweiler baby.
This is what happens when we lock ourselves in a room.
Late. So anyway, let's get to our regular schedule programming, because our listeners are probably like, wait, am I listening to Pero Let Me Tell You or an episode of like the Twilight Zone? The time
In 2001.
Speaking of 2001.
Okay, Space Odyssey.
Speaking of 2001, do you know what was released on 2001?
Like,
What album was released in 2001?
I do know what album was released in 2001.
What? Dime.
It was the seminal, career-defining soundtrack album that the world has come to know, love, and adore as Glitter.
Glitter by Mariah Carey. Do you know, listeners, that as we record this episode and you listen to this episode on Friday, Glitter is number 3 on the iTunes top selling albums chart. It is incredible that has happened. Where do we have sound? Where do we have sound?
A little brighter.
Do people hear that?
I think they
A little
might.
longer.
This is what happens when you record on a computer.
Okay.
That has a pop-up.
We should edit that out.
I'll figure it out later.
Okay.
If we do it.
So yes, Glitter, at 17 years after it was released and bombed.
So it's definitely a slow chart climber.
I would say so.
Okay.
I would say so. So yeah, it's number 3. Maybe it'll be number 1, but it's number 3 on iTunes.
It's 1 year shy of graduation.
it's number 3 on iTunes. I don't think it ever reached number 3 on. Well, no, it was number 2 on Billboard. I think when it was released.
Well, that makes sense.
But
also,
it's number
it happened
3
on September 11th, so not much else was happening that day.
Yes. Well.
In terms of album sales.
In terms of albums, yes. So yeah, that's kind of weird and interesting. But you know what? It's the power of I guess the internet and now consumer driven and social media. Because I always go back, you and I have talked about this in the TRL days. I think it was either 99 or in 2000 that, when TRL was really, really popular, that there was like a whole fan thing going on online.
They would like campaign
that they brought back Hanging Tough by New Kids on the Block, and I think it like topped the chart of TRL,
for more than a day.
Yeah, like I don't know, 12, 13, 14 years after it was released, it was like number 1 on TRL. So the power of the people, I guess.
The power of the people. Yes,
so Dime, what do you have to tell me?
Well, so I actually just saw this. I think it was just released. It's a little more recent than Mariah's Glitter, as far as releases go. So we all know and love the game Monopoly, right?
Are you talking about Miami-opoly?
No. Literally saw this maybe like an hour before I got here. So,
it's fresh off the press.
Fresh off the presses, or fresh off the internet. I don't even know how presses work anymore. Gutenberg would be so sad. So there's lots of Monopoly versions out there. You've got your Big Bang Theory Monopoly, Golden Girls Monopoly. They've done for certain cities, etc.
Is this a Hialeah Monopoly?
God, I wish, but no. It's Monopoly for millennials.
Ay, Dios mío.
And the tagline, and I want to get this absolutely right, so I'm just going to the tagline for the game is, "Forget real estate, you can't afford it anyway."
That's true.
Isn't that awesome?
Trust me, I know.
I know, yeah. That's why I figured you'd resonate. But I think it's so they've kind of traded things out. So like instead of money, you collect experiences, and instead of buying real estate, you go to like music festivals and things that millennials do.
So instead of going to jail, do they go to Coachella? No. Instead of going to jail, they go to that music festival Jarul had.
Oh, the fire one? The fire music
supposed
festival?
To be super exclusive, and people ended up stranded in some random Bahamian island having cheese and bread sandwiches.
I love it.
And notice I said cheese and bread, not cheese. Huh?
And frolicking con lo cochino.
Yes. So is that...
Se ve que there was no Cubans there because we would have killed them and made tremendo lechon.
Yeah, on the beach. Okay, so tell me a little bit more about this millennial-opoly.
It's already sold out on Walmart's website. And so I'm bringing it up right now. So let's see. Instead of vying to build hotels on places like Park Place and Boardwalk, you rack up life experiences like attending a meditation retreat or rescuing an animal. Now, as with everything nowadays, people are unhappy. Millennials find it insulting.
I was going to say, they do realize that this is like a parody, right?
I don't think they understand parody. If they did, they'd be a lot happier about their life in general.
It's so funny that we rag on millennials all the time, and we're like practically on the cusp.
Yeah, well, 82 is millennial.
Well, no, because some say 80.
That's the thing. It's very hard to narrow
But regardless, whether it's 80 or 82, we're very close to it, and it's something we so don't identify as or with
at all. But it's just interesting to me where it's like something as silly as a Monopoly game gets people's panties in a bunch, where it becomes this whole like, why don't we make one for baby boomers that just shows about like, how you guys ruined the economy and it's like, calm down, Ashton. Okay, it's a game. So go over there with Willow and have your chai lattes, which coincidentally might actually be one of the pieces you use on the board game.
Instead of the thimble?
Or the iron.
The iron.
I hate the iron. Instead of usar una plancha to play a game.
But go to Coachella. Go directly to Coachella. Don't collect $200.
Well, no, because they can't get jobs anyway. But that's why they collect experience points, essentially.
So there's no money.
From what I understand, there's no money.
Okay, so what's the tangible barter that you have?
Experiences. So basically, you get, and again, I haven't
So
played the game. I'm only reading what the press releases say.
this piece of something for 10 Ultra tickets.
Exactly. And if you've ever tried to buy an Ultra ticket, you know how expensive that can be.
Okay. I see it. Okay, so let me ask you something.
Oh, and
on the
best
board.
part, hold on. The best part is on the cover. Uncle Moneybags or Moneybags is his name, right? Uncle Moneybags. He's wearing a participation ribbon.
Oh my god, that's awesome! That is great. Oh my god, we gotta screenshot this and put it on our Instagram.
We'll definitely post it.
So, does the board have a safe space?
Maybe that's what Go is. Because Go is, where you don't go to jail, so you kind of sit there. I mean, I have to look into it a little bit more, and literally I just kind of saw it and I was like, we got to talk about this. But what struck me as funny is just like, it's not offensive. Like, offensive to me would be like if they had, Monopoly, the N-word edition. That's offensive.
Oh my god, don't even go there.
But, you know what I mean? Like, that's offensive.
Well, okay, but nowadays the problem is that offensive, the term offensive now is used for anything and everything. Right. So, they don't realize that it's a parody, and parody has to do with humor.
Well, because people aren't funny anymore. Remember, like we can't make fun of anything anymore.
Because it's offensive.
Because it's offensive. It's a vicious cycle, which is why I use the square.
But
I'm more of a polygon person.
But your four corners really offend me.
You're trying to put me in a corner, and I don't appreciate that.
You know what I often wonder? In Hialeah, let's bring it home for our listeners who know Hialeah.
Literally, we're recording in Hialeah.
Do you think there are millennials in Hialeah? Porque aquí la gente no come tanta mierda. Porque if there's one thing that Hialeah is you could say a lot of things about Hialeah.
But you can't say they're come mierda.
But Hialeah keeps it real.
They keep it so real, they spell it R-E-E-L-Z.
They keep it real.
Reals. Yeah.
I don't think I've come across many millennial.
I mean, they exist.
Well, in terms of the
demographic,
age,
right,
the demographic,
right.
yeah.
But I think that has a lot to do with culture. You know what I mean? Como tú y yo decimos, this is, well, to continue to quote our BFFs on Mommas and Merlot, it's really a bunch of white nonsense.
You know that honestly...
That has permeated itself.
Well, I think you were one of the people I spoke about this to years ago. I didn't know the PSL thing.
You didn't know?
No, I just...
You didn't know about, like, hi, I'm going to go get a PSL wearing my Uggs, and I'm just going to go...
I didn't. When I started seeing memes about it, because you know me, I'm very up-to-date to things and very in touch with all that.
As we established in the last episode with the If You See Me, sometimes you don't catch things.
Totally go off my radar. Right. And I'm like... But doesn't everybody like pumpkin? I mean, I don't... Whatever.
But you didn't understand. Like,
I could take or leave pumpkin spice. Right. I mean... If I have something that has pumpkin spice, great. And if I don't...
What if she's the replacement for Posh on the reunion tour?
I've seen that. But, I mean, I didn't know that it was a thing, like a white girl thing. Right. I didn't know that at all.
You didn't know that that's the preferred drink of Basic Becky's everywhere?
Basic Becky.
In the morning. At night, they prefer Chardonnay.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay. So what do our listeners think about this?
I think most of our listeners... probably don't even think. They're probably just like, I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah, I've heard you use that term recently a lot, the white nonsense.
White nonsense. Because I love it. Thank you, girls, for bringing it into my life. It's just so encapsulating. Because you and I have said this several times where it's just like, in our countries of origin, I think I'm going to go ahead and do something I shouldn't do, which is speak for most Hispanics. You're worried about so many other things that are a little bit more life and death, like, do I get to eat today? That you're really not that concerned about whether or not somebody's giving you a participation ribbon.
Right. You know that all this talk...
about participation ribbons?
Participation ribbons, yeah.
Do you want me to get you one?
No. I don't need one. That's okay.
I'm going to have one for everybody at Christmas.
That reminded me, I forget if I mentioned it here on the podcast. A couple of weeks ago, I binged Dear White People.
You didn't mention it here, but I saw it on your Instagram.
Yeah. I'm totally in love with that show. And the great thing about that show, going back to parody... Well, it's
Did you
not
see the movie
parody.
that it's based on or no?
Huh?
Did you see the movie it was based on?
No, I haven't seen the movie. But what I love about that show is it's a very smart show, and I'll tell you why. The entire premise of the show, in terms of the humor, is based on irony.
Okay, which if you don't do it well, it comes off horrible.
If you don't do it well, it comes out horrible. And I think if you're not open-minded,
you don't understand what they're trying to say.
Because, for example, when that show came out, and I really recommend that show to our listeners, Dear White People, it's on Netflix.
It's original.
It's only 2 seasons. It's been renewed for a third, but the third one hasn't come out. And I think each season has, how much was it? Like 10 to 12 episodes? Or 13 episodes. And they're half hour each, so you'll browse through them. So it's really good because the criticism that show got was that it was racist towards white people because they call out a lot of the white nonsense. But what's really interesting is that, for example, the main character in that show, who has the show Dear White People, because it's based on a radio show, on a campus radio show called Dear White People, and she's the host, and she calls out white people for the white nonsense, the so-called white nonsense, and she she's constantly like saying, because you've oppressed us, and we're the oppressed, and
the typical things you tend to hear.
Yes, but she's also half white. Her dad is white, and her dad is like the love of her life. Like, she loves her father, and she's in love with a white boy. So So it's all based on irony. And then, like, for example, she really calls out like the white cliques. Right. Like, oh, here you have the emo people, and here you have like
the stoners and the nerds,
and the girls that think they're like the Kardashians. Right. But then within like the black kids, they have their own cliques and stuff like that. So it calls it calls on that dynamic, and it's a show that's totally based on irony, and it's really cleverly written, and the dialogue, you would love it because the dialogue is like fast.
It's rat-a-tat.
It's my god! Endings. It's like on fire. It's like 100 miles an hour, the dialogue, which I know you enjoy that. Yeah. So I mean, you could watch it in like 2 days. That show.
A weekend.
Yeah, but it's great. I really recommend it. And again, it's one of those things that it's based on irony, and if you don't sit down and listen to it and see it in its full like spectrum, it's very easy to say like, oh my god, I'm so offended by this. Right. This is so offensive to me. Like, that's not true. And it's like, okay, you're kind of missing the point. How this is tongue in cheek. Right. So,
Well, we're not known for subtleties anymore, I guess.
I guess not.
Yeah.
I guess not. So, anyway, moving right along. So, Dear White People, Netflix. I also recommend on Netflix, since we're talking among friends.
We're giving free plugs.
I also recommend the final season of
House of Cards.
Well, you were with me this past week, and I didn't stop talking about it.
This is true. Now with 100% less pedophile.
Oh my god. Okay, I wasn't going to go there. I just simply was going to say that despite the fact that the show had to overcome the loss of its main character, or one of its main characters, the show left you with a bang. And freaking Claire Underwood, my god, she's one of my favorites.
Oh, you've said that time and time again.
Yeah, she. I'm obsessed with that character. I need more of her. They need to make like a Claire Underwood movie.
House of Claire.
House of Claire.
Actually, now you said last weekend, I want to give a quick shout out to the people who organized Gamer Comic Expo.
Oh yes,
for giving us the opportunity to go to the inaugural con. It was a blast.
And if you follow us on Instagram, you know firsthand how into it we got. Well, you got.
Yes, sir. I was there, decked out in my Nightwing cosplay. But we also got to meet some really cool people.
Yes.
Cosplayers, celebrities. If you have not had the chance yet, please visit our YouTube page and check it out. We got a bunch of interviews there with some cool people, specifically with Danny Trejo. I mean, freaking Machete.
Yeah.
We spoke to Machete.
Cosplay, gamers, comic book, obviously.
I have to say, that's not your...
It's great to feel out of your element.
Yeah, that's not your lane. No. But you were a trooper, and
I was, and I realized that this is like my 3rd or 4th convention with you.
Yeah, actually, that's about it. Yeah, that's all right.
Who's counting?
Apparently we are.
So keep it coming. I'm totally down for going to Comic Con.
But the next one we're gonna find a costume for you.
Okay.
We're gonna find a costume for you. I don't know what we should dress you
We'll
up
cross
as.
that bridge when we get there. I'll be that green little thing from the Flintstones.
The Great Gazoo.
Yeah, him.
That would be fantastic. Also, because you're so freaking tall, it would be great to have like a 6 foot tall Great Gazoo.
That's awesome. And it'll be so funny, the people who don't get it. They'll be like, who are you?
What are you?
No,
Listen.
no, I mean that in that environment, people will get it.
Okay, yeah, but with that said, I mean, I'm pretty versed in characters, and there were cada personaje que I was like, I don't know what that is.
That's like, I've told you this. When I was in the Midwest, living in the Midwest, I always for Halloween, we go to these like huge Halloween parties, and I always wanted to dress up as a Chapulín Colorado, because I'm like, nobody here is gonna know about the Chapulín Colorado unless like the lone Latin guy, he'll be like, a Chapulín Colorado, and I'll be like, yes, somebody who gets me.
I didn't know that Chapulín was grasshopper until like 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So,
no.
Anyway, well, we have...
he probably does know that Chapulín is a grasshopper.
Yes, and we have a very exciting interview.
Yeah, so we've gotten to meet so many interesting people, but we got to interview documentarian Billy Corben. Now, for those of you who just think we said we're going to talk to the lead singer of Smashing Pumpkins, no, we said Billy Corben, not Corgan. He's a documentarian who's done Cocaine Cowboys. I mean, that's really his most infamous one, but he's also done The U. He's got a new one coming out called Screwball, which is all about the A-Rod steroids, which DJ is just salivating to watch because, no love lost between you and A-Rod.
Nope. Sorry, Mr. Jennifer Lopez. And it's also
which I'm sure that's how he loves being referred to, as Mr. J-Lo.
Well, I used to refer him as something worse.
That's a step up.
I used to refer him as a cancer in the Yankees. So being Mr. Jennifer Lopez is actually a good thing. It's a great thing.
So does that make J-Lo chemo?
Oh my God. Go on with what you were saying.
Anyway, so we got the interview coming up, and stay tuned. It's going to be a good one.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. And as promised, today we have Billy Corben.
Yes, for those of you who don't know, he is a documentarian who has done various documentaries such as Dogfight, coming up now, Screwball, and most famous, or depending on who you talk to, infamously, Cocaine Cowboys. So welcome, Billy.
Thank you for coming on the Pero Let Me Tell You, Billy.
Thank you for having me. As promised, you are men of your word.
So, in terms of before we get into your work, what I think is really interesting, obviously, is that you are a Miami boy. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about growing up in Miami and exactly where you come from, and your experience as a kid here in Miami.
Well, I'm a gringo, a native.
You're the one.
Native Floridian and lifelong Miamian. I was born actually in Fort Myers, moved down to Miami when I was about maybe 3 years old, and have been here ever since. And originally moved to the city of North Miami Beach, which I believe is the only city in America with beach in its name that has no beach in the city. But that's the story of Florida, lies that came true.
That just kind of blew my mind.
That was also the story of Fort Myers. I mean, my grandfather was in the real estate racket. He actually bought this property, which was swampland that had been drained, and built one of the first suburban, planned communities it's called Lehigh Acres.
Yes.
In Fort Myers, and so one of the first things they did there was they paved roads. They created a grid. That was the first thing. So you just had this grid. It almost looked like a checkers board or a chessboard from the sky, and then just long, endless miles of paved roads in a grid, and then nothing else because they hadn't really broken ground on anything yet. But they needed roads, obviously, to even begin construction and to build a community. And so what would happen is they would show up in the morning, the construction crews, to start working, and they would discover like an abandoned plane out on one of the roads. And they'd be like, why the hell is there a plane abandoned on the roads? It turns out, of course, that when you have a miles long stretch of clean paved road in the middle of nowhere, it's a very convenient landing ground for drug smugglers.
Who knew?
Who knew?
And
right?
so and
I was thinking like drag racing,
just a terribly convenient spot to land a plane with illicit drugs aboard. And so that was I was not exactly exposed to that in my youth, but I certainly heard those stories. I was barely single digits, but that's how we kind of grew up. And then we came down to Miami, and it was a very interesting time. We moved to Miami, I think, in about 1981, 82, 83, right about there. That was right when the homicide rate was peaking down here. So it was a terribly exciting time. Later on, when I started to gather with my producing partners Alfred Spellman and David Sipkin, the local news footage from the archives that wound up making up, a very significant part of the Cocaine Cowboys documentary. This was all the news footage that I had grown up and you guys grew up kind of watching, in the kitchen at 5 p.m. the local news while mom's making dinner and you're doing your homework, and there's all this crazy shit. And it's one thing to watch it night after night growing up, and then watching it all together, hours and hours on end, strung out together in a timeline. When we were researching the documentary, I called up my mother and I said, "What the fuck were you thinking raising children down here in those days?
It's
what the hell's
that.
the matter with you?"
Well, I'm actually glad that you started off with that because we're about the same age. We were children in the 80s, and obviously growing up in Miami, I'm from Kendall. We knew what
nobody's
was going.
perfect.
Well,
technically we're from Westchester.
I'm sorry, you pronounce it's Westchester.
Westchester.
Yeah.
See, he is a Miami boy.
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Totally, bro. Jose Canseco Boulevard, bro.
Anyway, so obviously, growing up in the 80s in Miami, we knew about the drug issue. We knew that as we used to call them, marimberos, were all over the place. My parents were always like, "Oh, you see, so and so, they just bought a boat, a house in the Keys, and
and that's why we don't go to their house for parties."
That's what se metieron a marimbero. That's why we're not going there anymore. But obviously, growing up as a kid, we kind of knew what it was. But we obviously didn't understand the whole logic. So, would you say that was your first? Growing up at that time and in this place, was that initial inspiration for you to eventually do these documentaries, or just as an adult you said, "Hey, I really want to do this," or was this something looming in your head even back then?
Well, two things that you notice, because when you're a little kid, you're not necessarily aware of drugs. Like that's not necessarily something when you're that young that is on your radar. There's really no basis of understanding for it. There's not, even if you'd seen someone doing cocaine, you wouldn't even know, what the hell was going on. So my earliest memories, first, I definitely have a recollection of crime. Crime was an issue. There was violent crime. There was all sorts of crazy crime happening all the time, all around us. I remember, seeing police, passing crime scenes. I remember, stories of horrible crimes being committed in and around our neighborhood in North Miami Beach growing up. But the most distinct memory that I have, earliest memory that I can think of, is of the money. I remember people, very much the same way your parents would point out the new boat, that a neighbor would get. I remember all around us in this, essentially working class, predominantly Jewish neighborhood that we were in. I remember people had money. They weren't flush with cash. They weren't rich, but they would have a new car. They'd have a Porsche in the driveway. They would be adding a second story to their modest single family home. They'd be making a new pool or fixing things up or a new piece of jewelry. None of these people, even to this day, am I aware, were in the drug trade. But what they were, the beneficiary was trickle-down economics, Reagan's famous theory that the only successful real-world example that I can think of Reagan's trickle-down economics was the drug rush, was the cocaine boom in Miami in that era. Because if you were a car dealer or a jeweler or a grocer, or you sold wine or you sold real estate, like my dad did, everybody had enough extra money kicking around because of all the cash in the community. It literally trickled down into every facet and every part of and sector of the economy, whether you were legitimately involved in the drug trade or you were just everybody here in a way was a beneficiary in some way of it, I believe.
Indirectly, yeah.
We were the ultimate exception to the rule.
Well, actually,
listen, the woman who cuts my hair to this day she has stories. She told me a story about how, like, back in the 80s, she'd be cutting hair, and when you leave the salon, you come, you give her a kiss goodbye, and you slip her tip, into her pocket,
right.
So she would go home and she would turn her pockets inside out, and she'd have all the, the money balled up or folded up in her pocket. And one day she finds a little baggie with white powder
Oh shit.
that one of her Colombian female customers had apparently slipped into her pocket as a tip. And she was so naive. She said to a girlfriend of hers, she said, "What the hell is this?" And she said, "Honey, that's better than a tip. It's worth more than gold."
That's the ultimate frosted tip.
I like that. So obviously you have all this going on around you as a kid. When do you decide? Now, obviously you're an adult, you're, post college. When do you decide I want to do a documentary about this phenomenon, really, that was occurring at Miami in the 80s?
Because obviously a documentarian has to do research. You have to collect things. I mean, it's not like I wrote a script, let's go film it. There's so much more to it.
Yeah.
Well, that wasn't until much later when we actually became documentarians. We were filmmakers early in life, but we were not documentarians yet until we did our first doc, Raw Deal: A Question of Consent, that premiered at the Sundance Film Festival
Correct.
in 2001. And that doc really exploded at the festival. And we did a lot of press. We did like 50, 60 interviews in 6 days.
Oh my gosh.
And everybody asked us the same question. They said, now that you have arrived, you are the stars of Sundance, so to speak. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to move to New York or LA? And as obvious as it was to them that we would move to New York or LA, it was just as obvious to us that we were going to come back home to Miami. First of all, that's why you call it home. It's where you go when you're done with other shit, And so we were coming home to Miami, and we really we didn't want to be like three more schmucks peddling our wares in New York or LA. Like all filmmakers go to New York and LA. We wanted to actually kind of take a little bit of a risk, but build our brand and build our company as, quote, the Miami guys, end quote. Like we wanted our geography to play into our brand, and we wanted people around to go, oh, those are those Miami guys, right? Oh, those are those Miami guys. So because otherwise you're just, like I said, another bunch of guys in New York or LA. So in order to achieve that, Raw Deal was a true crime Florida story, but it was not a Miami story. It was not a South Florida story. It took place at Gainesville, the University of Florida. So we needed our Miami calling card, is what we called it. And we came up with this idea that was always kind of in the back of our minds, particularly Alfred Spellman. He had our producing partner. He really thought that this should be the next thing that we did. And we decided to pursue it. We called it City Made of Snow. And we started to pursue sources who would go on camera and would talk to us about this era in vivid and sometimes gruesome detail, and it was just
that was one of the things from the documentary that really kind of blew my mind, was how you got all these people to speak on the record about some pretty shady stuff.
Yeah, because most of these people, these underworld people, were still around and kicking up until like a couple of years back. I mean, I think one of the last ones to get killed was Griselda Blanco, and that only happened like what, 3-4 years ago. Yeah,
but I mean, even the people that sat down for interviews, I'm like, how the hell did he get that? How did that happen?
Well, with these things have to. I say, has the story ripened? We always say, has the story ripened? And every story takes a different amount of time to ripen. Depending on how traumatic an experience it was, depending on the kinds of characters and people and personalities that were involved, and it has to ripen with respect to access to the first person storytellers who experienced and lived it. It has to ripen with respect to the marketplace having, obviously, hopefully, an interest in hearing these stories. So we just thought that the marketplace had ripened. First, that was the sort of business calculation, was that you have to remember this time period. We're talking about like 2004, 2000, 3, 4, 5, right around there when we were making it, and decided to make it. Scarface had been released on DVD, the 20th anniversary edition, and it outsold like E.T. and Jurassic Park combined on DVD for Universal Home Video. And Def Jam Records did like a tie-in, inspired by soundtrack release. The biggest selling video game of all time at that moment was Grand Theft Auto Vice City, which took place entirely in a Miami 80s milieu. Michael Mann had finally announced that he was going to do a Miami Vice feature film once and for all. Miami Vice Season 1 came out on DVD with all of the original soundtrack music. They went back and relicensed. Like, it seemed to be, this nostalgia cycle nostalgia cycles seem to run in like 20-year intervals, and it seemed that like shit was into Miami 80s again, and so it just seemed like the right moment. And then enough time had passed to where the people who were involved in this either had done their time, they enough time had passed to where they did not feel threatened or in danger anymore, and then it was just a matter of finding the people that were ready and willing to have those frank conversations. Funny enough, the original vision for Cocaine Cowboys back in the early to mid-aughts was to tell the story of Willie Falcone and Sal Magluta, who were world champion offshore powerboat racers and the biggest Cuban cocaine traffickers in history, and their sensational federal trials that occurred in 95, 96, and then 2002. And but what we discovered, because the case had just sort of there were still kind of cases lingering by 03, 04, 05 that it hadn't ripened yet. People weren't willing to talk. People were still scared. People were still, it hadn't gotten to where we needed to go yet. And so Cocaine Cowboys, as we ultimately devised it and finished it, was actually our plan B. That was our backup plan. Oh wow! The movie that we made, and so that's a good example of a story that hadn't ripened yet, and so we had to find another way of telling that story, and ultimately found John Roberts, Mickey Monday, Jorge Riviayala, Griselda Blanco, and the various other interview subjects that helped. We called it a mosaic, where each of those people that we interviewed, the cops, the attorneys, the reporters, the contract killer, the enforcer, the wholesaler, the smuggler, they were all individual tiles in this mosaic. And once we put them all together and we zoomed out to look at the greater whole, they formed like the skyline of downtown Miami, and that was ultimately the story we wanted to tell, was where Miami was a character and how America's Casablanca here was really addicted to drug money. And we have an environment where, with a transient population, a lack of institutional memory, a very third worldian economy and perspective when it comes to government. And so that really created this perfect storm. And of course, obviously, our thousands of miles of unguarded shoreline, our geographical proximity to the Bahamas, to Colombia, to Jamaica, created this perfect storm where Miami just sort of thrived in this trade and in this era.
Well, what I found really interesting about the documentary was, I found many things interesting, but one of the things was that, if I recall, I guess I didn't realize how long the drug trade had been going on in Miami. And, I remember interviewing, a lot of people came on the documentary that they were smuggling drugs in the 60s and 70s.
Like, you always think of it as like the 80s.
Like the white guys were. Right. And then the moment the Cubans and the Colombians got there, we screwed it up.
Yeah, sorry.
And it completely took a different course. Like, I remember, I guess I didn't realize that it was something that was happening for so long, but it was just, I guess, more on the down low. It really was more underground, whereas in the 80s, it was all about excess. And
well, there's also something to be said for Hispanics not knowing subtlety.
Let me ask you this, Billy. When you were doing, obviously, knowing the personal background and knowledge that you had in this, when you were doing your research for this film, what would you say is the biggest thing that surprised you?
What was the biggest thing that surprised me? I think that there was very little being done about it until the murders occurred. So the level, we know Miami is a very permissive town, a place to party. It's a place where people come and vacation and what happens here stays here kind of stuff. But to actually sort of see it in action, that's actually an interesting pun, in action. As is what occurred, is that, like, as long as the money was pumping, nobody really cared about the drugs. Cocaine was considered, a rich person's party drug, and it was very successful professionals or well-paid professionals like doctors and lawyers and wealthier people who would go out for a weekend, like you would any weekend party. In this case, not just drink and dance, but do some blow, and then they'd be back at work on Monday morning. There really wasn't an excess of overdose deaths yet, and so nobody really seemed to care about the drugs as long as the money that the drugs yielded were flowing into the community. It's only when the drug wars started that people, the authorities started to really care about it, because obviously, with marijuana was a cash business. You'd buy it,
right,
and by the pound or by the bushel or the bale, and you'd sell it, and that would be that, a very simple transaction. And cocaine was a consignment business. It was so expensive. You're talking about upwards of $50,000 for a kilo, which is 2.2 pounds. Nobody could really afford it. If you were buying 4 kilos from somebody, you didn't just have 200 grand sitting around. So it was a consignment business. Somebody would give you the 4 kilos, and then you go and sell it or resell it, and then you come back and pay the person. Obviously you make a profit, and then you pay the person who you owe the 200 grand. The 200 grand. Problem is, what happened if those, that month or 2 weeks or 3 weeks rolled around and you didn't pay? Obviously, you weren't going to file a lawsuit against them for failing to pay you for your cocaine.
Yeah,
so, of course, people started to enforce their trade with these enforcers, and there was a brand of violence that was kind of unique, that a lot of the has been attributed to the Colombians who had grown up in the era of La Violencia, the decades-long civil war, and it begat this style of enforcement and this level of violence, public level of violence in Miami, that was shocking, that was in broad daylight, where there was potential collateral damage, and in some cases real collateral damage of women and children who were not involved in the transactions, who were getting hit in the crossfire. And so that's what was surprising, is that no one really cared about the drugs as long as there was money. The second there was murder, they're like, okay, we need to put a stop to this, which obviously which is obviously a very responsible thing to do. But this idea that anyone really cared about the scourge of drugs or cocaine is total bullshit. They just, the politicians, the cops, the lawyers, everybody was just addicted to the money. So it wasn't until, oh, wait a second, murder is bad, we need to stop murder, that they decided they needed to crack down on the drugs and the smuggling and all.
So corrupt politicians, you say? What?
Oh, I know. I should have checked to see if you guys in Hialeah were sitting down when I revealed that.
So what would you say was the turning point in terms of, like, the beginning of the drug wars? Is it the shooting at Dadeland Mall, like, for example, that happened in like 81 or that was July 79. I remember it well. I was 1 year old. So that was like the first. There was kind of a 1-2 punch there. There was a shootout on the Florida Turnpike, and then there was, in the middle of the day, from car to car, and then there was the Dadeland shooting. Both of these turned out to be interconnected, a part of a very specific drug war between 2 gangs, including Griselda Blanco allegedly and her husband at the time, and so they were, and one was retaliation for the other. It was sort of this ongoing, obviously that's hence the war terminology. But like, those were the first shots. That was really when people were put on notice. Cops were carrying 6-shooters in those days in 79, and they showed up at a crime scene where there were hundreds of rounds that had been fired from a variety of weapons, some semi-automatic, some just revolvers. But this was a sobering moment
for a police department that realized that they were totally outgunned. And you might remember the War Wagon, which was this white Econoline van that said like happy party time supply on one side and happy time party supply on the other, with two different phone numbers that didn't match each other, that were kind of stenciled onto the side of this vehicle to make it look undercover. And it was actually this reinforced war machine, war wagon as they called it, with all these flak jackets hanging down to provide cover in case of a car-to-car shootout. All of these weapons, it was like machine gun turrets. It was ridiculous. And for actually months afterwards, there was like this ongoing scare of white Econoline vans. Like every time someone saw a white Econoline van, they would call the police, but police didn't want to pull them over because they knew all you had to do was, put your sirens on, and these guys would open the back and unleash on you. And you'd be gone. You'd just be Swiss cheese. So there was a lot. I mean, that was a very sobering moment. But even then, it took time for the laws and the law enforcement to really catch up with the level that the bad guys were at. It still took a while for the police to kind of upgrade their arsenal and try to keep up with the cowboys.
Wow, it's so interesting. It's just so interesting having grown up in here at that time. I mean, this is kind of a frivolous question, but
I have a frivolous anecdote as well.
I gotta ask because we have a lot of listeners, not only all over the country but all over the world, and obviously a lot of people reference, especially during the '80s, Miami Vice. So since you're our guest and you're the expert on this, how realistic would you say is Miami Vice to what was really going on here at that time?
Generally, I think fairly realistic, specifically a little bit silly, just in terms of how certain drug transactions would take place. Those were a little goofy, definitely fictionalized, like people, showing up with 2-3 kilos or 4 kilos in a trunk in a dark parking lot, and then opening the trunk and then someone tasting the cocaine. Most people were not really dealing with strangers. People were in a network of people that they regularly dealt with for the most part. So it wasn't, it wasn't really like that. It was more of a company and a set and arranged transaction. So it didn't quite happen like that. But some of the broader details, obviously the level of violence, the glut of drugs, the impact of the money in terms of its corrupting effects on all levels of our community and our criminal justice system, that was all fairly accurate. Obviously, you didn't have cops driving around in Ferraris, but the race boat element was very, very real. Willie and Sal, as I said, were offshore powerboat racers. That element was very much inspired by them. And in fact, at least half, if not more, of the world champions in offshore powerboat racing in that time were known or convicted drug smugglers, either marijuana, cocaine, or both. That's very well known. Now it was relatively well known in those circles at the time. In the powerboating circles and certainly in the law enforcement circles. That's why the cigarette boats and the Donzies played such a big part in Miami Vice. So they got a lot of that. The big picture stuff kind of right. I always get, obviously everybody in this town reps their neighborhood or their municipality. That's the thing that people don't understand outside of here, that Miami-Dade is 34 different municipalities, in addition to the unincorporated Miami-Dade area, or Metro-Dade as it used to be known as. But so there's all sorts of people kind of repping all these different neighborhoods. And I say there's a common misconception about Miami that we are a melting pot, but we're not a melting pot. We're much more akin, I say, to a TV dinner where sometimes the peas fall into the mashed potatoes. We self-segregated ourselves into these communities that with sort of people who are, similar color, nationality. I mean, even in North Beach, you drive, you got to know what block, you got to see which flag is flying. There is the Argentina block, here is the Venezuela block, here is the Brazil block, here is the Puerto Rico block. Like I say, don't get into a road rage incident until you see which flag is flying, hanging from the rear view mirror, because in Miami, we are all kinds here. It's like Game of Thrones in paradise, in Miami. So I think that's important for people to understand, is the diversity is real, but so is the segregation. So there's a lot of, it gets very tense. And so I get offended in Miami Vice where they're supposed to be, I think, Miami cops, but yet their station is in Miami Beach,
Of course,
and the cars are from Metro-Dade. Like, that shit bugs me, you know? You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, okay. I'm like, which department is this? Like, you know, can we just keep it straight? You know, like details like that. But that's kind of important for you to understand. Like, if you see a Hialeah police car, you're going to have a different feeling than if you see a Miami-Dade, you know, police car, for example, pulling you over. I'll give you an example. When we're shooting this new documentary a couple years ago, I was driving with a notorious convicted drug smuggler, pretty recently out of federal prison, and we're driving right down 8th Street. We're like, you know, we're in Westchester, actually. We're right by FIU. I think we went to, there's that Cerrusi's that used to be there. It's gone now. I think it was right by
where Pizza Hut
right
was.
by FIU.
Yeah.
And so we actually had lunch there, and then we're driving, and he's showing us some of the different properties and homes that they owned back in the day when Willie and Sal had, you know, were running the town. And he said, "Oh, we're going to go over to this place." So I look at it on Google Maps, and I'm like, "Yo, why don't we cut over the canal here and, you know, and drive, you know, it'll be shorter." And he goes, "Oh, no, bro. No. He goes, "That's Sweetwater over there. We never drove through Sweetwater. The cops are too corrupt, bro."
Yeah.
This is a fucking drug smuggler telling me this.
And he's saying they're corrupt.
Yeah.
Right. He's like, "Oh, no, bro. We never go. The rule is we never go to Sweetwater. The cops are too corrupt," which I just thought was classic.
I have that same rule, but for different reasons.
By any chance, was any of the properties he was looking at in like Lennar Homes, you know, like 8th Street, like 150 something?
Oh yeah, all that kind of.
Because I know that was like Marimbero City in the 80s.
Yeah, and then you had like Leomar Parkway out there out west. They named the street Leomar Parkway after this guy Leonel Martinez. It was this stretch of Southwest 132nd Avenue, and like within less than like a couple of years later, he gets busted in a big drug trafficking ring with like violence and murders and all this shit. And then they just kind of quietly take his name down, like they did for Jose Canseco in Westchester. They just sort of quietly take his name down.
Now that you mentioned Jose Canseco, that is a perfect segue into the next thing we want to talk to you about, because you have a new documentary coming out called Screwball. And before we speak about Screwball, I need to go on the record, and I need to, full disclosure, I am a huge New York Yankees fan. I always have been. I even go to New York to see them play.
Wow.
However, I have never been an Alex Rodriguez fan, and I thought he was a cancer to the team. So full disclosure. So with that said, tell us a little bit about your new documentary, Screwball.
Well, let's just, you know, establish that is only your opinion and the opinion of every Yankees fan I've ever met.
Yeah.
That's
why I said full disclosure. I you know where I stand.
It is not an unpopular perspective.
Yeah.
I'll have you know. We living down in Miami, we were hyper aware of the biogenesis scandal that erupted in 2013, and which led, of course, to the suspension of Alex Rodriguez, which was the longest suspension, I believe, to this day in Major League Baseball history, and really the capper to the Bud Selig era of baseball, which is, of course, the steroid era of baseball. So I think, you know, Selig was really, you know, they wound up in a battle of legacies, you know, between basically this eccentric millionaire and this eccentric billionaire, you know, with the money of Major League and power of Major League Baseball.
I like to think about it as the Manny, Barry, and Alex era, but go ahead.
For the record, listeners, this is the part where I have to play catch up because I am so not a sports person. I can sit here all day and talk about, you know, cocaine cowboys and dogfight and all the other ones, but baseball, you lost me.
Well, what's fun about this is I'm not a baseball fan either. Alfred Spellman, my producing partner, is. He subscribes to like the MLB.com like, you know, season pass, and so like he has an iPad on his desk all season long, playing baseball games on mute, or as I call it, his screensaver. So
I've been known to do that.
Yes, I'm not a fan either, which is what's kind of wonderful about this story is that it has practically nothing to do with baseball. It is just this great Miami hustle story, you know, about this guy who was an unlicensed doctor got his medical degree in Belize, and started to treat, kind of an anti-aging clinic with treating patients with testosterone and human growth hormone, and started to build a stable of pretty high-profile professional baseball players, starting with Manny Ramirez, and working his way to the highest-paid baseball player of all time, Alex Rodriguez, and this obviously erupted eventually into a huge scandal. But it's a lot about sort of the culture of fake doctors, in South Florida, and in the state of Florida. We have kind of an epidemic that the state does very little to police. And particularly in South Florida, where you have a lot of people from other countries who may very well have been doctors in their nation of origin, and have a lot of patients, maybe here to their strip mall storefront, medical clinics or whatever, who are also from their nation of origin. So there's sort of a relationship or a trust there, because if you're a doctor there, why aren't you a doctor here? Whenever there's like a news story about like fake doctor found in Hialeah, I'm like, that's not a news story. A news story would be real doctor found in Hialeah.
That's called a Tuesday.
Yeah, so it's like, okay, but like, so that culture, the culture of the fact that the governor of the state of Florida was responsible for the largest Medicare fraud in the history of the country. So he's clearly not prioritizing cracking down on healthcare related fraud in the state. That you just have this kind of hustle town and this hustle state, not unlike Cocaine Cowboys. Like anti-aging clinics were just like the new hustle. In the zeros.
Wasn't the one A-Rod was going to allegedly was in some like run-of-the-mill like strip mall like on the second floor or something? Because I remember I saw it on TV and I'm like, who would have known that I could just imagine being there and like, I see A-Rod. Like, what are you doing here walking in the parking lot?
It was a 2-story building, but it was on the first floor, right across the University of Miami, right across, oddly, from Alex Rodriguez Park.
Oh my gosh.
Field at Marklight Stadium. Yeah. So it was on the first floor. There was no signage for most of its existence. And Alex, to my knowledge, never went to the quote unquote clinic. Mm-hmm. He was a VIP client that Tony Bosch had serviced on the road. You know, he would go to wherever Alex was playing. Exactly, house calling. He'd go to whatever boutique hotel he was at or whatever town he was staying at, during the season for a game, and he would treat him at his apartment in New York on the Hudson. He would go wherever Alex was, and so Alex never had to come in to the strip mall storefront, office storefront there. He didn't have to deal with that. But and Tony Bosch is an interesting character for people familiar with Cuban exile history.
Yeah.
He's related to Orlando Bosch,
yes.
who is one of the most famous and notorious anti-Castro Cuban exile terrorists, who was charged with using a bazooka, a shoulder-launching missile, firing a shoulder-launched missile into a Polish freighter because, comunista. And so he fought in the port of Miami. He stood on like the MacArthur Causeway, put this bazooka on his shoulder, fired a missile at this freighter, and the missile hit the side of the freighter and rolled down the side into government cut because it never armed.
Fun fact: Orlando Bosch, he lived about 2-3 blocks from my parents' house, and I don't remember if it was in the late 80s or early 90s. They got a lead on him, and like the SWAT team, the FBI, everybody came in and they closed down like 3 blocks around his house, including my block. And I remember we couldn't get home because they had found him.
Because Miami. I mean, like I was literally driving down the street a couple months ago, coming to Miami Beach. Our office is in Miami Beach, and I don't live on Miami Beach, so I have a commute. And so I'm driving down the street, and I see this older Cuban gentleman kind of walking around the block, like almost kind of power walking, but he was like 90 years old, this guy. And I look closely, and it's Eugenio Martinez, who is one of the Watergate burglars, okay? he lives in Miami Beach. He was just doing his daily sabbatical. He wakes up every day. He does 10 push-ups and then goes for a walk around the block, to keep himself young and vital. He's 96 years old. But of course, you're just driving down the street in Miami Beach and you see a fucking Watergate burglar just, going
What else are you going to see?
What else are you going to see? So, for our listeners out there who maybe are not as familiar about this, what would you describe, the documentary is about? What would you tell them exactly?
And when does it come out?
Yeah. So I would say it's a Elmore Leonard, Carl Hiaasen, Coen Brothers-esque take. It's a tale of Florida fuckery about how basically the highest paid player in the history of baseball was brought down over a $4,000 debt between a cocaine-addicted fake doctor and his anorexic steroid patient because Miami. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's the best way to put it. And it's a total farce. I mean, we called it Screwball, because it's intended to be a comedy. And obviously some serious things happen in it, but the movie itself is just a pretty zany comedic take on the events.
I have to say the trailer is genius. The fact that you have children in the the different roles of the characters involved was great. But my favorite thing that I took away from the trailer, and again, because I'm a baseball fan and a Yankees fan, I have a bit of a different perspective of it, was when allegedly A-Rod said, "I want to take whatever Manny is taking." That was great. Because, again, when the history of Manny and A-Rod and all these guys.
And Manny had been busted the year before for taking steroids, and Alex didn't seem to care. He just says, I want whatever Manny was taking. That was apparently according to Tony Bosch, one of the first things, if not the first thing that Alex said to him when they met at a hotel in Tampa when he was in town, when the Yankees were in town for a game. And yes, you pointed out that this is not when you make a sports documentary, like take The U, for example, right. It's pretty straightforward. You interview a bunch of players and coaches and press people, sports reporters, and then they talk about a bunch of games, and you get a bunch of game footage, you intercut it with they're like, this FSU game, boom, this national championship game, boom, this bowl game, boom, and you just put it together. It's not paint by numbers by any stretch, but at least there's a guide. There's a basic premise guiding you. In this movie, all of these scenes took place in hotel rooms, in a shady clinic, at restaurants and bars, at Live nightclub in South Beach, at the Fontainebleau. So there's no footage of that. There's no archive or game footage. In fact, in the whole movie, they only mention 3 games in the entire movie, baseball games, that we show you a little bit of footage from. Otherwise, it's just these talking heads. And so we were faced with a challenge. What do you do about that? And so we knew we were going to have to do some recreations, where we hired actors to perform these scenes that our interview subjects are talking about. And so we came up with a creative solution. And,
sure did.
And we hired actors to lip sync the dialogue right from the interview subjects, drunk history style. But the actors are 9 years old, and they have facial hair, and they wear Yankees pinstripes uniforms, and they have lab coats and like I said, facial hair and gray hair, and we shot it all on location. So when Tony says I was drowning my sorrows at the Tiki Bar at Ritz-Carlton Key Biscayne. Boom, we are at the Ritz-Carlton Key Biscayne. He says I had to take blood from A-Rod at Live nightclub. Boom, we're shooting at Live nightclub. Right. They said we had this clandestine meeting like All the President's Men style, but instead of at the famous parking garage, right. That Bob Woodward met. Met Deep Throat in. Yeah. Boom, they're going to do it at the Sports Grill South Miami across the street from the Boca Tanning Salon. So boom, we're at the Sports Grill with these 9-year-old kids, acting out the scenes, and it's pretty funny, and I think it worked really well, so and we shot all over Miami, and it was a blast.
Yeah, when can we go check it out?
So we just world premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival. Great crowd.
2 weeks ago,
great
right?
critics. Yeah, just 2 weeks ago. Mm-hmm. We're going to have the U.S. premiere at Doc NYC, which is in New York, the second weekend in November. And then we are going to have our Florida premiere Friday, November 16th at the Key West Film Festival. We'll probably
we got to figure out a way to get there.
We're saving Miami. We're saving Miami for the best for last, because we'll probably do it up really big in Miami. But we're gonna have some fun and.
I'm just curious. Have you heard from A-Rod's people?
No comment.
You gotta ask.
Before we went into this interview, I was telling Ish, I'm like, I have to restrain myself a little bit in this portion of the interview because I don't want to go all, rant on it. But, he's all Mr. Fancy ESPN now dating J-Lo, but no, Yankees fans don't forget.
It's really surreal because, as you have observed, he was never well liked when he was playing.
Never.
And
he was a jerk.
So this isn't even an image rehabilitation for him. This is an all new image. Like nobody ever liked him, and now
he's the doting boyfriend.
He's like a pop culture darling, and he's like, people love him, and it's surreal. But I never knock another man's hustle, so I tip my hat to him for what he's been able to accomplish, but he never even had to go on the mea culpa tour, that Lance Armstrong had to do.
When he was a player, he was a pariah. As you said, fans did not like him. From personal experience, I'm a big Yankees fan. I would every year I would go see the Yankees because I have another good friend of mine who's a very big Tigers fan, Detroit Tigers. So we would go to Lakeland where the Tigers have their spring training, and we'd always go on a weekend where the Tigers were playing the Yankees, and we would always, we would both get what we wanted.
Right.
And going to spring training games is great because it's very laid back. There's no security. The players are very accessible. And I remember that for a couple of years that I would go, the players, you could greet them. Jeter, CC Sabathia, all of them from the Yankees would come, and Posada, they would come, take pictures with you, greet you. Not A-Rod. A-Rod, you would see him going all over, in the back, just walking, completely ignoring people. And I'm like, whatever, dude. Whatever. The highest paid athlete in the world, and you forget how to play baseball in October. But that's a whole other conversation.
Well, that's a really interesting thing about it. A really astute journalist from the Globe and Mail in Toronto said something like, it isn't about Screwball, the movie. He said, it isn't about baseball itself. It's about America, its institutions, and losing faith in them. Because you really see that everybody has dirty hands here, especially Major League Baseball, and the manner in which they conducted this investigation and just acted a fool down here in Miami. And so Alex is really, it's not unlike the story of America, which is what we're teaching our children, is that honesty and playing by the rules is not a virtue anymore. It's seen as a liability.
Right.
And the message that we're sending to our children by way of Screwball, by way of this presidency, is lie, cheat, and steal, and that's how you get to be the most powerful person in the world. That's how you get to rehabilitate your career as a multi-million-dollar Sunday night baseball commentator. That's how, which is again, it's not just the story of it's not a story of baseball. It's not a story of Alex. It's a story of America and our institutions and how they are corrupt and failing us, but yet they are more successful and powerful than ever.
Right. I love that. And I am so excited about this documentary.
Yeah, no, I mean, we definitely, like I said, we got to figure out a way to get down to Key West and check
Well,
this out,
you could just build a raft, I guess.
Well, it is in our blood.
Yes.
it is genetic.
I know a guy.
Yeah.
Funny story. On Cooking Cowboys, this is a wetchete story. My director of photography on that project, Armando Salas, who's a very successful now DP in LA, does incredible work. He was 2 years old. He came with his parents on the Mariel boat lift. They were not allowed to leave. They were engineers and architects, and so they were considered people who were not permitted to leave the island. And so they had to doctor some papers or lie and say that they were housekeepers or custodians or something in order to get on a boat. And his grandfather, who was already in the United States, came over on a boat to pick up Armando at age 2. His parents, and of course the Castro soldiers at gunpoint, forced them to take a whole bunch of other people on their boat. God knows who those folks were. And Armando and his parents lived in Westchester, and when we shot Cooking Cowboys, we needed to shoot a bunch of crazy, weird B-roll and like mini recrees, and we wound up in his parents' garage in Westchester, right off of Jose Canseco Way or whatever it was called. And we shot a bunch of those shots, B-roll shots, and recre type stuff in a garage in Armando's parents' garage. In Westchester back in like 2005.
You were by Coral Park.
Yeah.
Coral Park, not far from FIU. Yeah. You know what? I have to say in closing, what I really like about you and about your work is, aside from the fact that it's really good, I feel that your work, it has something for everyone. Obviously, here being from Miami, we look at it from a certain perspective. But at the same time, somebody who's not from Miami, who's never been here, doesn't know about the culture here, can see this and completely be enamored by it and so intrigued by it. And I really appreciate the fact that you've done all this work, whether it was Cooking Cowboys, The U, now Screwball. You've done this work that shows multiple sides of the city, because something that we've talked about here in the podcast before that we get a little bit frustrated on is that every time somebody mentions Miami,
it's the beach.
It's the beach, South Beach, partying, Puff Daddy.
That's it.
Boom. You ask somebody outside of Miami, they think there's one hotel, the Colony on Ocean Drive. And people think when they say Miami, they literally think of 10 blocks from 5th Street to 15th Street in Ocean Drive. The thing that really gets my goat, we were talking about like the details of the various municipalities, that what those in movies and TV always drives me crazy. But like, how about during a Dolphins game or a Miami, University of Miami Hurricanes home game, which is in Miami Gardens at Joe Robbie Stadium, and then they'll go from like the blimp shot of the stadium, they'll crossfade to Ocean Drive. I'm like, motherfucker, that's 20 miles away. Like
20 miles and a good hour in traffic.
Yep. Yeah, you'd think that the stadium was sitting on Ocean Drive or something. Like it's in Miami Gardens. Like show a little respect,
Wait,
like,
it isn't?
I kind of liken it to whenever somebody goes to Cuba and they always take the picture of that one damn Chevy in La Habana. Like there's that one that I think it's like a bluish green. It's in front of the Rodriguita del Medio, and everybody takes that damn picture, and it's like that's all Cuba is.
Yeah,
it's that one area. So the Colony Hotel is Miami. That's it.
I'll tell you, that was part of our gamble when we decided to be the Miami guys, to come back here, to not move to New York or LA. The gamble was that we were going to be local filmmakers or provincial filmmakers, that people weren't going to be interested in the work because it was so Miami centric or Florida, Floridiana, and obviously the benefit of Miami is that it is one of the most famous name brands and cities in the world, and so people are interested in it. And the Florida of today is the America of tomorrow. And if you want to learn something about the rest of the country, or what challenges we'll face or calamities we'll face in the years to come, you need only look at Florida or South Florida. T.D. Ullman said that we're like the bellwether, the canary in the coal mine. So it makes Miami a very important city. It makes Florida a very important state to the rest of the country and the rest of the world. And so, it's there's a sense of pride, of course, that people care about our stories and our characters and what happens here. And one of the greatest compliments I think we've gotten about our stuff is, like, take The U, for example. People who don't care about football, American football, watch it all over the world, and it makes an impact. I hear from people who are like, I hate sports, or I hate college football, or I hate football, and my girlfriend made me watch it, or my boyfriend or husband or wife made me watch it, and I loved it. I don't even like football. I don't care about football. I never watched a football game, but I loved the documentary. And I think that's what Screwball is going to have the same effect. Like, it doesn't matter if you've ever even heard of baseball before. It's not about baseball, and so you'll be able to enjoy that. And the fact that people outside of here, a very quick funny story, I needed to interview a Colombian drug money launderer. And
as you do,
and we were going to fly him in, keep him anonymous. We silhouetted him and made his voice sound all distorted and robotic in the interview. But I needed to talk him into coming and going on camera and giving us and trusting us to do this interview. So I'm talking on the phone with him on this weird anonymous number. He called me from this unknown number in Colombia, and we're talking, and he said, "What is your name again?" I said, "Billy Corben." He goes, "Spell it, Corben." He goes, I've heard of you. I've heard of your work." And I said, "Oh yeah, well, we did this documentary called Cocaine Cowboys," assuming, me racially profiling him. I assumed that the Colombian money launderer was going to be familiar with our Cocaine Cowboys work. He goes, "No." He goes, "I've heard of that." He goes, "But you did the U with Michael Irvin." And I was like, and I laughed. I was like, "What do you know about it? What do you know?" He goes, "Oh, I love that movie. I love Michael Irvin. I loved him in the Dallas Cowboys." I'm like, "He's like, I love American football." And we had this very funny, we kind of bonded over the U, which I didn't think to lead with that, if you know what, to lead off with that in my pitch to him. I totally buried the lead there because he was all about the U, which is just, again, the way this work, travels and translates. It's been a real pleasure, and it's been a real pleasure repping the 305, and it's been a pleasure, but a little less so repping the 786.
Oh, well, yeah. No, you don't. 786 has no ring to it.
We, in an earlier
no
episode,
pun intended, after I said it.
Earlier episode, we said that 786 is like, what is it, 9 in New York? It's everybody wants to be a 212.
Right.
But nobody wants to be a 9. What is it? The
917.
917. Nobody wants to be a 917. Everybody wants to be a 212. Yeah. That's
right. Well, I had asked, when Pitbull became Mr. Worldwide, I was like, could I be Mr. 305? And they're like, well, kind of like Dwayne Wade is kind of Mr. 305, like DJ Khaled's Mr. 305. So I was like, could I be Mr. 786? Could I?
I think you should. It's still open.
I say run with it, Billy.
It's still open. And Pitbull. Yeah. You know somebody who knows somebody who knows Pitbull.
Yeah, so why not?
Well, listen. No, this is Miami. We're all 1 or 2 degrees away from Pitbull. Let's be real about that.
Yeah, we are. Actually,
darling,
I do know somebody who knows Pitbull.
Yeah.
Of course you do. You know me. I know Pitbull.
Well, there we go. Now I know somebody else.
Darling.
Anyway, Billy, thank you so much. I mean, you are the epitome of what our podcast, represents, and the message and what we want to be
when we grow up. As a podcast, if you were.
Thank you so much for being on our show. We can't thank you enough.
Thank you guys for having me. I really enjoyed it.
So, welcome back, everyone.
Yes, that was so much fun. Like, that interview, I mean, we could have literally...
It's one of the things that I like about, really, really like about him is that he's very Miami in the sense of, history and relevance. And... everything that he was talking about in terms of what he researched and what he lived through, and especially the cocaine.
We all lived through, really,
right? Yeah. That's what I was saying. The Cocaine Cowboys movie and that whole thing, because we are of a certain age already. Right. We remember when we were kids in the 80s and this happening in real time.
Yeah.
And I understood, even as a kid, I was like...
something wasn't right.
Marimberos aren't good.
Right. Not gonna lie, I, for the longest time as a kid, thought marimbero was like a musician.
Well, yeah.
Right, no, but I didn't...
Yeah.
Make
and it's funny because we always had, I remember...
Mira,
we knew someone who, not somebody related to us, but just somebody that we knew, that, the wife didn't work, and, I think he... fixed air conditionings, or he was a mechanic of sorts, and all of a sudden they got a house in the Keys, they got a boat.
No, they had everything.
They had everything. They had a huge house, and I'm like, wow. My father has 3 jobs, and so does my mom, and we could barely afford bacon.
You get excited when you don't buy the Czech cola.
Yes. So whatever. So no, that was a great talk, and everybody, especially I know a lot of our listeners are from Miami or Miami based. You know exactly what we're talking about. But he really captures it. Oh no. Yeah, I mean, the stories he has to tell are just fascinating, no matter where you're from.
Yeah. Actually, the Screwball, the Florida premiere of Screwball is actually today. This Friday, it's at the Key West Film Festival.
Yes.
So if you're in Key West and you're at the film festival,
please go.
Tell Billy we say hi.
Tell him that you. Pero let me tell you, sent you.
Exactly. So you ready?
I'm thirsty.
You're thirsty.
I'm thirsty.
Estás un poco, atorado.
Yeah.
You gonna go first?
I'll go first.
All right.
So, you know how our motto here, in a way, is listen, laugh, and learn.
Yes.
And we like for our listeners to be happy, smile, laugh with us, but we want them to learn something.
Right.
So my last Coke of the Desert is more on that learning kind of,
You're giving it to the Encyclopedia Britannica.
No. I would give it to World Book, because I still have my World Book Encyclopedia.
I think we still have ours, too.
Yeah, I'm getting rid of that shit. Are you kidding me?
It's dated as hell.
So what? That's the beauty of it. Anyway, Oh, actually, something to the World Book. So World Book, it features...
Again, this is not his last soda, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, no, it's not. World Book features profiles on countries. So when you go to see and look up Cuba, obviously it gives a profile on Cuba and the history of Cuba and the government of Cuba, blah, 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 blah. And then I remember there's pictures of it that it says the Cuban government, gives free meals to children and free education and, whatever. And, you see a picture of a kid having lunch or in a soup kitchen or whatever. And then, I remember showing that to my parents. Be like, eso es mentira. Allá la gente se mueren de hambre, que están dando comida. So a little. But anyway, I'm gonna give my last Coke of the desert to a woman called Violet Jessup.
Violet Jessup.
You're not gonna know who she is. Nobody is.
This is where I want people to learn. That name sounds so fantastically made up.
This is where I want people to learn. So, we all know about the Titanic.
Okay.
The Titanic had two sister ships, the Britannic and the Olympic. Yes, they all end with IC.
Well, that's why they're sisters.
And you know that I'm a big fan of ships.
You're an enthusiast.
And ocean liner.
I'm going to take you beyond fan.
Yes, of ocean liners and stuff like that. That's my thing. That's my jam.
Yeah.
The Titanic had two sister ships called the Olympic and the Britannic. So the Olympic was the oldest one of the three and had the longest career. The Olympic sailed for close to 30 years. And
that's a lot for a ship.
Yeah, and the Olympic was involved in a
doping scandal.
No, it was involved in a collision with another ship. Where the hull, like the Titanic, was pierced and the ship started to sink. But thankfully, it wasn't as big of a catastrophe as the Titanic. So I actually think nobody died, but it did. The ship did sink. It did partially sink.
And then
they were able to repair it, and then she went on to lead a very long life as an ocean liner. But that woman, Violet Jessup, was in that ship. I think I know where you're going with this. She was on the Olympic. Fast forward a couple of years, and she finds herself on the Titanic.
Oh, no.
Yes.
Oh, no, Violet Jessup.
So she finds herself on the Titanic, and we all know what happened in the Titanic.
Did she die?
She survived.
She survived?
She survived. She survived. Now, the Titanic sank in 1912.
Okay.
In 1913, we were already in World War I.
Right.
Okay. She was a nurse. Okay. And a lot of times during wartime,
I swear I got
big ships.
You tell me she survived Hiroshima.
Listen, big ships are used for either hospital ships or to transport troops or something. So in 1913, the sister ship of the Titanic. So the Titanic sinks, but she has her sister ship, the Britannic.
Okay.
So remember, she was on the collision and the sinking of the Olympic. She was on the on the sinking of the Titanic, and she survived both. And now she's on the Britannic. And the Britannic during World War I was turned into a hospital, a floating hospital. So she, the Britannic, by Greece, it was sailing somewhere around Greece and the Aegean. It hit a mine. There was a mine in the water, and the ship it blew. So it caused an enormous gash in the hull, and the ship actually sank quicker than the Titanic. There were a lot less fatalities because there was shallow water. It wasn't cold. And it was actually not too far from land. So I think that only
rescue workers are probably able to get there quick.
Right. I think only a couple of hundred people died, or it wasn't a large number. The people that did die on the ship, it's actually quite tragic.
There were two lifeboats. Or something?
There were two lifeboats that were lowered at the end of the ship, at the stern. And they were lowered when they were not supposed to be lowered. And the suction of the propeller sucked in the ships, and those people were chopped by the propeller. You could look this up on YouTube.
Was Violet Jessup
Guess who was one of the people on those little boats that were being sucked in by Violet Jessup, and she survived.
She survived?
She was the only person from the lifeboats that survived. So she was on the sinking of the Titanic, on the sinking of the Olympic, and on the propeller debacle on the Britannic, which the Britannic sunk completely. and it chopped up. I survived all 3. So Violet Jessup, this Coke is for you. And she died. She lived a long life. She died in like her 80s or 90s.
You know what would be great is if every picture of like a horrible disaster just has Violet Jessup walking away.
Yep.
Like Bruce Willis out of Die Hard or something. Like the Lindenberg, she's just walking out of the flames.
Yeah.
Like just there's Violet.
Violet Jessup. Violet is unsinkable.
I'm also starting to wonder if Violet caused all this.
Maybe
She's the only common denominator.
yes.
It's kind of like when
Aside from the IC.
Yes,
name of it.
but she planned it.
Yep.
You know what?
So Violet
you,
Jessup.
Violet.
Yep. You know what you did. But when I read that, because I know a lot about this. Huh?
How did you stumble on this?
Well, because I know a lot about all this stuff, and you know what it is. Even though you know a lot about it, you keep researching.
Right.
And I've always known of the propeller incident with the Britannic.
Isn't that the name of an album?
The propeller incident? I don't know. I've always known about that. And the other day, like I was actually reading about the victims, and there were a lot of children because people were like, "Oh no, put the kids in the in the lifeboats first." And they did, and they got sucked in by the propeller and chopped up to pieces.
Oh, no.
But Violet was like, "Hell no!" And it's great because there's a video on YouTube of talking about this, and it's an animation, and you see the two lifeboats being lowered by the propeller, and you see they did like little cartoons of people, and then you see like a little cartoon of a nurse, and she says like, "This is not a good idea. I'm getting out of here," and that was Violet.
Well,
so
Violet
anyway,
Glass Soda's for you. And actually, you know what? On some weird level, it makes sense that you chose the apparently indestructible Violet Jessup, because my last soda is actually going to Stan Lee.
Oh,
who
okay.
just passed away this Monday. So for those of you who may not know, and if you don't know, shame on you. Stan Lee is really just considered the father of modern comics.
Even my mother knew who he was.
Did she really?
She did.
She didn't think he was Spike Lee like that.
No,
that newspaper.
My mom would not know who Spike Lee is,
Okay.
but she knew who he was.
So, for those of you who don't know, he is basically the father of the modern comic book. He created, or co-created rather, so many iconic characters like Spider-Man, the Incredible Hulk, Thor, well, the Marvel version of Thor, the Fantastic Four. He really is the reason that we have an entire franchise and all these movies we like to go see in the summer and the blockbusters. But what he also did was he took the concept that initially originated before he even started working into funny books, which was good versus evil, and he really put a human element to it. Before Stan Lee and his method of storytelling, the heroes really were just kind of stoic, and the good guy had no real personality to speak of. But once the Marvel age started, and I'm a DC fanboy, so this is a big grain of salt for me to say, he's the one who really humanized. Peter Parker had girl problems. The Fantastic Four was a family that actually bickered. Matt Murdock, Daredevil, was a lawyer, but he was blind. So, he really started to give us things that were a little bit left of center. And we take it for granted nowadays, the idea of the flawed hero, the nuanced characters, because it's just always kind of been there for large swaths of us. But this is the guy who we can thank for it. And so, as a lifelong comic book nerd, we just went to Gamer Comic Expo. I definitely think that he's somebody who is iconic and will be remembered forever. He has some controversy associated with him, of course, as all iconic characters do. But ultimately, sir, I give you my last soda, and I end it with your famous catchphrase of Excelsior.
Well, there we go. But did he put Violet Jessup in any of his comics? She indestructible Violet Jessup.
She may have been the basis for the Hulk. We don't know. We don't. Iron Man.
Who knows?
Maybe she was. We don't know. He was in World War II. Stan Lee actually fought in World War II, I think. So, yeah. Who's to say? I don't know.
He heard about this nurse that just wouldn't die. He's tragic.
This woman's indestructible.
Boom.
So, yeah, why not?
Well, that was interesting.
Yeah.
That was an interesting last Coke. So, well, listen. Our listeners listened and learned with this last Coke.
And I'm pretty sure they laughed.
So, well, yeah, we hope you listened, laughed, and learned.
Yep. And what do they never, ever, 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 ever get to forget?
Never forget your pastelito, your croqueta, and your jupiña. And thank you so much, as always, for joining us.
Yep. And if you have a chance, guys, check out some of our network brothers and sisters over at the Geek Bro Network. You've got Shiver, What's Up Bro, Mommas and Merlot, give them a shout out, give them a listen. They've also got some great content out there, and it's a little on the geekier side of life, but there's something for everybody.
Oh, Mommas and Merlot, no geeks there. They're awesome.
They're geeks.
Yeah, but the content.
Those girls can throw down with the best comic.
Yeah, they can. Yeah. Well, no, because I'm not geek. I'm not a geek in that aspect, but
right. Well, yeah, geek can be so many things.
Yes, yeah. It's undefinable. So anyway, well, everybody, thank you so much. Until next time.
Hasta luego.
Bye.
Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man. Is he strong? Listen, bud, he's got radioactive blood. Can he swing from a thread? Take a look overhead. Hey there goes the Spider-Man. In the chill of night, at the scene of a crime, like a streak of light, he arrives just in time. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Wealth and fame, he's ignored. Action is his reward to him. Life is a great big bang. Wherever there's a hang, you'll find a Spider-Man.